I got the no never mind. When you did your best to deliver.
Hello, everybody. This is Michael here. Eclectic Roots Groove playlist. Last week, I told you about how, and as you can see in the camera, David Deacon is here. David, why don't you give everybody a wave? Yeah, so it was really great because I was driving home and I was thinking, what song am I going to do for the next playlist on Eclectic Roots Groove playlist? And lo and behold, I was listening to Spotify to your song, David. They all sing along, and I thought, man, oh man, this guy is like really good. And I thought, no, I'm definitely going to talk about David. And then I listened to the song over and over and over and over and over again, and so I covered the song we all sang along last week, and you can check that out in week 35. But I'll actually talk to David about some of the lyrics on the song because I think that they're really good. But what I'd like to do is, I said that we're gonna do the song No Never Mind this week. But before we do, David, I just kind of would like to talk about a bit of your background, and your background is wild. I mean, if you go to ddeacon.com, there's a full outline of David's story. But I mean, you're a poet, you're a painter, you're an entrepreneur, you're a wild man driver. You've done some absolutely incredible things. And so what I'd like to do actually is to kind of unpack the kind of steps that you went through as I go through your biography, and then we'll get to the song No Never Mind, to kind of outline how those influences in the stories that you have had such a big impact on your music. The first thing I'd like to talk about is, and I can see in the background you have art. That's not your art, but we had a little bit of a dialogue the other day, and you showed me some of the paintings that you did. And you went at an early age when you dropped out of Brock University at philosophy, and then you went to Paris, creative arts.
Right.
Can you talk to me about that a little bit, that experience?
Well, whether I went to university or not was a whole debatable item in a way, because my parents really wanted me to, but I was wanting to sort of take off and travel or something and just see the world and figure some things. My older brother had hitchhiked around the world the year between his doing high school and university, and I was kind of in a similar mood. But I ended up going to university. I got accepted, which was the part that had me go because I didn't think I ever would.
Yeah.
And then I was there for a couple of years, and I started to feel like it just wasn't what I was thinking of. For example, my second year of philosophy, one of the courses I took was 6 existential philosophers. The final exam was 6 compulsory questions with a small quote from each one saying, how is this relevant to their philosophy?
Yeah.
And I wrote why each of those philosophers would have thought it was a dumb exam and a really dumb question about their philosophy, which had to show exactly, that I knew their philosophy and their point of view.
Right.
But I got a D+. And I thought, because he didn't fail me, okay. But it was a perfect example of why I didn't want to keep going to university.
Yeah.
And I'd had an exhibition at the university of my art, and I'd actually sold out, which blew me away.
Yeah. So let's back out a little bit. So when did you start to paint? I mean, because if we're talking, you're already you're 21, right? Around that time, or when you
I was doing at university at that point. I was 20.
Yeah.
I'd started painting. I was always drawing when I was a kid, but started really painting 14, 15 fairly seriously. By 16, 17, I was doing some decent work. By 17, 18, I still have some of those paintings in my house that I'm very happy with. I was also writing poetry. So there was that whole side of me. Oddly, I had an attachment as well in a weird way to politics, and we are not going to go into that. But bottom line was, I got enough money put together. I did a motorcycle trip out west, thought about the whole thing. I'd met this woman at the art gallery who was at the Sorbonne, and she
Wow.
says, "You should come to Paris and study art." Well, she was a beautiful young woman, and I thought, well, I got one connection in Paris,
Yeah.
and I went.
Yeah.
And
So
net
you went to the
result was,
Sorbonne, Sorbonne.
no, I didn't. She was at the Sorbonne.
Okay.
The Sorbonne wouldn't have allowed me in. No, I
Okay.
went to the what was it called? CASA, the Center for American Studies in Art in
Hmm.
Paris was the name of it. And they had studios for painting, for sculpture, for dance, and for music. And
Okay.
it was a very cool place. And she knew the art the painter who was the anyway, she got me hooked up. I went in, I did a deal where I would do janitorial services, and I got a real good deal on the cost of it. And so I was able to do a year studying art in Paris and
Yeah.
all that that entailed. Yeah.
And so what made you come back? Because then when you came back, you all of a sudden got into some other extreme thing, which is the second question that I have related to motorcycle racing and then eventually
Yeah.
into car racing. So here we are, we have an artistic young man who is painting, doing things of that nature, doing poetry, interested in philosophy, goes to Brock, doesn't like it because of the way that they're approaching it, zips on off to Paris to do some creative arts work there, and then you decide to come back. What made you decide to come back and what carry this?
Well, the first thing was I was out of money.
Right.
So that kind of tends
That'll do it.
to make you make decisions one way or another.
Yeah.
Um, and, and it was like, I've actually been working on a book and I just finished it about that 3 year period. One of the things that happened in Paris, and I was interested in the commentary you were making the other day
Yeah.
um, on one of your shows. One of the things that happened in Paris was um, I was I'd done all my art in a vacuum, and suddenly I was exposed to
Oh,
all this fabulous, great art from centuries. And you're looking at it and you're kind of humbled every time you turn anywhere.
yeah, yeah.
You're going, oh my God, oh my God. And I was an innocent farm boy who went over there and I'm painting, and I didn't even know who these people were. And then suddenly I did, right? And
Okay,
suddenly I'm faced with all
quick
of it.
pause question there because which is really fascinating because I want to comment on what I said earlier in some of the podcasts that I've done in Eclectic Roots Group where when I started when I was doing music I thought okay I'm going to be really
That
I'm
was
I'm going to
Yeah, you're
protect
not going to listen to anybody else. No, that's
yeah
what I was going to riff off. That's
yeah
exactly what I was going to riff off because what I
okay
was going to say was, I'm not so sure in a way that having all that right in front of me didn't actually kill a lot of what was in me because I
ah
was so intimidated by
ah
it. And it's
ah
like, if I'd grown with that, I think that's one thing because you grow with music. You can't avoid music, but you don't necessarily grow with art.
okay
Art, you have to go and search out in a different. It's exactly. I was riffing off exactly that thought that you said because I thought I get what you're saying there.
yeah
You're really trying to hold to who am I? What am I going to say?
yeah yeah
Well, yeah, in the end, what you find out, and what I've now got to is I can live with other art in the world and live with other things because I realize exactly your epiphany. It just took me, many too many years.
it but took us both the same same amount of time. So okay, so you're back from Paris, and then and you mentioned okay that were riding your motorcycles a little bit. So how did you then move into motorcycle racing and car racing? And the reason I'm asking, okay, people could say, well, listen, Michael, you're doing this thing on Eclectic Roots Groove, and you're talking to David Deacon. Why the heck do you want to talk about motorcycles? And the reason being is that it displays a bit of your personality in regards to a person that has a heart full of adventure and adrenaline, and
Yeah.
the whole notion of a conquest and going after that and competing. competing in the world. So you started off with
Um,
motorcycle racing.
So
Let's
I came back and
yeah.
I had a buddy who was a motorcycle mechanic, and he'd got me into a couple of races before I left. And when I came back, he says, you weren't bad. You had the wrong bike. We'll get this bike, and why don't you try it out?
Yeah.
And I did. And I was also painting, and I was sort of, as I call it, almost making a living as an artist. And I was doing some bike racing, and I was getting there, and I was loving it just because I
Yeah.
just enjoyed going fast. And dirt track suited me better than scramble. Anyway,
Okay.
net result was I ended up with a massive crash. I was in the hospital for a long time. I have a plate in my head. I
Yeah.
had 11 hours of neurosurgery, 5 breaks in my right leg, pin through the leg, compound fracture in the other leg. I mean, it was a mess,
Yes.
and it was
Yes.
a long time coming out of it. There was something that happened in that, and that is I was basically dead on arrival. I came through it. Nobody expected me to. I came through it, and I said, do you know what? If I died then, I wouldn't have had a single regret. Not a
Oh.
single, not a moment's regret about my life. I loved the way I was going on in my life. So I made a promise to myself that
Hmm.
I would live the rest of my life like that. I said,
The same
I
intensity.
like, to be engaged, to not just say, oh, I wish I'd done that, or I wish if you think something, man, go do it kind of
Mm-mm.
idea.
Mm-mm.
And it created a sort of recklessness in my life, I guess, in a way. But it meant I really was engaged. And people say to me, "Oh, as an artistic soul, why do you like racing? What did you get out of racing?" What I'd say was, when you're racing, if you're really, really going, like I did the 24 hours of Le Mans a couple of times, you're doing 230 miles an hour. That's US time. So 390 kilometers, 380
Yep.
kilometers per hour. It's massive speed. You're going
Yep.
down the straightaway. 20 drivers have been killed there, right?
Yep. Yep.
You're going down there. You're right in the
The
center
moment.
of the second,
You're
right
present.
in the center of that second or millisecond. You don't have any room for anything else. And what I used to say is, it's like transcendental meditation at speed. The
Yep.
rest of the world just goes away.
Yep.
And there's an addictive quality to that. But it has to do with, I think, a way of coming to a sort of peace in your
Hmm.
mind.
Hmm.
And what I find in art is forever restless. Writing a song, as soon as it's finished, if you spend any time looking back at it, you go, oh, I should have changed this.
Yep.
This
Yep.
is wrong. That could have been
Yep.
better. Or
Yep.
why did I use that set of
Yep.
words? Why didn't I
Yep.
do this? It's a history of revision in your mind in a way. Racing
Wait. What do you mean by
erases
history or
all
revision
of
in your
that.
mind? That I don't understand.
Well, that as soon as you've done everything, what you end up doing is you start doing all these revisions in your head and worry,
Okay.
oh,
Okay.
why
Okay.
couldn't I have done this better?
Mm-mm.
Whereas racing's got nothing to do with it. Racing gets you so, they say, Ayrton Senna said after he was doing lap times at Monaco that just got out of the question. He was almost a second and a half faster than anybody else, and he finally crashed. And they said, what happened? And he says, I completely lost myself. I lost myself into the moment so completely. It was like I wasn't here.
Oh my God.
And I get um it's yeah, and so if you're a reflective soul, and
Yep.
songwriters are, painters are, people, writers, you're reflective on things. If
Yeah.
you want to find an antidote to it, that's what racing is to me.
Yeah. So, but I mean, have you ever been able to translate the kind of the immediacy of being in the moment of a racing car driver and the aspect of, because for you, we'll talk a little bit next about, you as a poet. I mean, you mentioned at a young age you were writing poetry all along, and I don't want to do a spoiler alert, but how poetry actually introduced you to the concept of being able to be
Right.
in music. But so my question is that even in your painting or next topic, okay, so we've gone to really kind of a revealing part of you as a as an artist is this notion of being in the immediate moment and the idea of being able to be so present that you don't have time for anything else other than just being in there. Have you been able to translate that that discipline in your actual writing, which we'll say about in your poetry or actually in your painting, or is that only unique to the dimension of racing?
So, what I've done from time to time, I had a gig at the Rex Hotel in Toronto
Mm,
for 7 years, every other Thursday. It was a real dive when I started there. It's become the jazz spot in Toronto.
yep.
I like this is egotistical, but I say it was the house that I built
Yep.
because it was just a
Oh,
Rubby's
cool.
dive.
Cool.
And then and when we first went there, the front room we got people into, and the back room was just, it was cheap beer, the real cheap hotel upstairs, like $8 a night rooms. It was just a dive.
Yep.
And one of the things I used to do there was I get the band. I had really good musicians in the band, and I'd have some ideas in my head, and I'd say, "Okay, let's get this groove going," and then we just do a total improv. And I'd do the improv with lyrics as well. So
Right.
I just make up songs and spoken word or whatever in this whole thing, and it was like a jazz session with but the music was kind of very bluesy and whatever.
Yeah,
And and when I was good, yes, that was a lot like racing. Um,
because you
and
had to be
and
right
the
in the moment.
only
You had to be
yeah,
right in the
the
moment
only
with the
way
band.
I could do that well was if I really did shed things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And some of those I recorded, so I had them later. And so here I'll give you just off the cuff an example because it became a song that I did later. The moon is bleeding in the background where the political works to subvert or kill. The killing's okay. It's the subversion that's so insidious. We're the new generation of the old generation. The sky comes like thunder in our nation's bedrooms. Anyway, it goes on.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
I would
You
just,
got me totally immersed.
I just do it. Yeah, it had this, at the end of that little verse, it went, my insanity is not a disease. It's a state of hope. It's the skin of life peeled back, leaving everything open to the touch of things light as air. And then the piano just went off, and then my background singer did a whole thing. It was like,
That's, that's awesome, dude.
yeah,
That was just a fantastic moment, man. I was just like completely, you had me hook, line, and center. I was like, the way that you read the poem and whatnot, it's
yeah,
like, yeah, I was totally there. Okay, so now this next part of your life is kind of this aspect of you being an entrepreneur. This
yeah.
this business sense. And so somebody would ask the question, okay, well, what does being a businessman have anything to do with, music? And in some senses, I think it has everything to do with it. From a context of understanding what you know you know how to make process work, how to make it successful, how to make it fulfilled in a customer that's happy with what you're doing. So maybe or maybe I'll just shut up and just ask why. Okay, the immediate answer is yeah, Michael, I've got to make a living, right? So I have to make money. But I think it's probably a little bit more than that. I mean, because you put it down as I'm an entrepreneur. So there's
So
something about being an entrepreneur that attracts you. So I'm kind of curious as to in what way being an entrepreneur in what way does being an entrepreneur connect to you as an artist, and why is that important?
so it is right, your first statement about I needed to make a living. So,
Yeah.
I started doing things because I needed to make a living. I wasn't making a living as an artist. I look back and I said, if I'd understood certain things about the commercial commerciality of art, I might have done better at that time, but I didn't do. And
Mhm.
so I had to go that route. but I'm gonna go differently with this. Here's where I want to go.
Hmm.
Um, Camus in The Fall says, society is like those piranhas in Brazil. In 1,000 tiny bites, it eats you to the bone.
Hmm.
Here's your picket fence. Here's your nice wife. Here's your kids. Here's your job. Here's your this. Here's your that. And eventually, there's nothing left of you.
Right.
Me, actually, in a way, one of my biggest battles was my artistic side was the driver of my heart in my life. And I felt I was betraying it when I went to business. And so, when you say society is that, yeah, society tries to make you like it is, but also artist society tries to make you like they are too.
Yeah.
And one of the things I discovered was my artist friends had nothing to do and no interest whatever in my business life. And my business friends had absolutely no interest in anything to do with my artistic life.
Yeah.
And it's because we're sort of stuck into these boxes that they are socially acceptable boxes. So in a way, I've had a hard time, and it was only in the last 15 years I kind of came to terms with, hey man, you know what? I'm not a bad businessman. I
No.
actually enjoy the intellectual, strategic process of that, the human engagement, building a brand, building a brand with integrity, working with a team to
Yes.
make those important things. That's cool, man.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. In the end, I guess to me, I just didn't want to get into any box.
Yeah.
I've only just maybe started to rationalize that I didn't do too badly at it.
Yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
and just please understand when I'm smiling or laughing, it's because I'm absolutely delighted in what you're saying. That's in what you're saying, it makes a great deal of sense to me. Yeah. And for me as well. I mean, like when I was working at Nestle for 20 years and working around the world and whatnot. I mean, I'm obviously was longing for an capacity to be creative, but at the same time, I saw the means of being able to be creative within the work that I did.
Yeah. Yep.
Sort of like
Yep.
bloom where you're planted. And I think that, you know,
I like that line.
yeah, and one way of being within that reality is that it makes you think laterally rather than serially in regards to, oh no, I'm just doing this job. No, I'm thinking laterally from the context that, yeah, this is a business, but I can be creative within this business, and I can
Yep.
understand and learn, process, and I can understand and learn outcome. I can understand, getting something done, which in many ways
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a difficult thing because artists can a lot of times, start an idea, work on an idea, and never get it done. But this notion of having a goal, completing it, and getting it done has been very, very beneficial from the creative standpoint of really applying that discipline within the creative aspect as well. And I think that, for you, I really love the idea, and we've chatted a little bit, and I don't want to, spoil alert on that, but the idea of being able to work together potentially a little bit with you, and
Yeah.
and how does branding work, and how do you really make that, sing, and how do you correlate that idea of branding with integrity within the creative process, and allowing you as an artist, therefore, to be able to reach the eyes that really need to see David Deacon, the eyes that really need to hear, what you're saying. And that is a craft, and it can be an honorable craft in doing it. So that capacity of being an entrepreneur, allows that to occur. Um, so yeah, so what I like to do is get into the song No Never Mind. You know, I mean, I've written down all the lyrics because the lyrics to me are absolutely, brilliant. But the first thing I'd really like to discuss is this whole notion of your voice. And there's a lot of commentary on your voice as it relates to you as an artist from various reviewers and whatnot, and what you bring when you actually are reading your poetry in a music context or singing within it and the band behind you. Um, but how did can you kind of tell, because you told me a little bit of the story and you've already gotten back to it, and how you got into music and how you started to read poetry, and then you realized that you said, I want to play at this gig, and then you thought, okay, in order to do that, probably a good way of doing it is to have musicians surround me. But really has developed into, I think, that's why when I heard it, when I heard it, it was like, wow, this is so powerful. And just in the evidence of how you then read your poem
Yeah.
to me, and how I was
Yeah.
yeah, I was absolutely captured by it. So tell me about that art form of how it evolved, and then we'll get into the actual song of No Never Mind and the words. But I think the audience would really delight in understanding the evolution of your poetry and how you've embedded it into music, and how actually the band, even as you say in the quote, they say they really like it when you speak, and we'll do the playing.
Yeah. 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 Instead of singing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right
but
on.
you do actually have a really great voice as well. And so when I'm listening to you in the No Never Mind, there's the first part of the verse you speak, and the second part of the verse you actually sort of are you have a melodic lilt to the way that the way that you're saying it. But yeah, so let's just backtrack a little bit into the evolution of how you got into that medium
Yeah.
poetry with music.
Well, so it was just an odd coincidence. I'm walking up the East Side of New York City. There's a bar, there's a sign outside that says poetry reading tonight, George Plimpton. And I thought, wow, that's pretty wild. And George is a sports writer, and I thought, sure as hell, I'm as good a poet as George Plimpton
Yeah.
is. So I go in, I order a large scotch. I ask to talk to the manager. As it turns out, it's a woman, but she isn't the manager, she's the owner. She's an ex-model and really beautiful, lovely person. And she says yes. And I said, well, I'd like to open for George tonight. And she says, that's kind of weird. She says, okay, give me a couple of poems. So I did. And she said, oh, I actually like that. Okay, you can open for George tonight. And I did. And then she wrote me a letter, because this is back in '92. You actually got letters sometimes, and it said, "We'd like to invite you to be the Valentine's Day poet at our, at the pub." And so I came down to do that. But they had an opening act for me, and it was a woman folk singer, and she was very good, and it was engaging, and it was guitar and the whole sound thing. And I'm going, man, I'm going to be so boring in comparison to this, just doing poetry. So I actually started telling some stories as well and made it into a more interesting thing. But in my head, I said, okay, when I get back to Toronto, I'm going to put some background music behind, and I don't know what exactly,
Yeah.
but I'm going to find some way to do that
Yeah.
and put it behind, my spoken word. Well, I had a advertising agency at the time, and I did weird things like I got some bongo drummers down the street to come up to the boardroom and play some stuff while I tried snapping some stuff over. And rap wasn't really happening then. This is just spoken word crap. And then, a photographer did some stuff for the agency, said, oh, there's this guy I know who plays the piano really well. So he says, I'll get him, and my assistant plays guitar. So we went to his studio, and it sort of prescient of, well, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened there. Like the piano player did some coke and a bit of scotch and started playing, and the guitar player couldn't play the same thing twice, but it was really interesting and it was very jazzy. So it
Yeah.
worked with what I was doing with this spoken word thing.
Yeah.
I recorded some of that. I went to a restaurant where I used to go, the Amelia Street Cafe. It had all kinds of nude paintings in the thing. It was like, it was like pornographic art in a way, almost. It was brilliant. It was really art. It was good. And it
No.
was the guy who ran it was Parisian, and he was really off his nut. And I said, put this on your tape
Your sound
player. And he
system.
played, and he plays it. And he goes, oh, I really like that. What is that? And I said, that's me. And he says, okay, do you want to do a gig? I said, yeah.
That's the whole
And
idea,
that's
dude.
what I did. And I started doing that. And a year later, I had a CD done. But one of the songs on the CD was a real song, Hole in Heaven. And Chum FM and 99.9 The Mix
Yeah.
liked it. And they didn't give it a lot of play, but they gave it light play, and they
Yeah, just
spoke
to
highly
help the
of
audience who's listening and who don't know Toronto, Chum FM is like the
it. It was big.
radio station in Toronto.
Yeah,
Like it is like, yeah, if you're on Chum FM, it's like it's a huge
it
deal.
was big.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
Carry on.
So it was cool. And I ended up selling 5,000 CDs as a privateer of that first CD.
Yeah.
And then, I got gigs and I kept on going. But it started because, so No Never Mind is perfect because that song is exactly from that. If you notice, actually, I'm not singing in the whole thing, but I have a melodic quality in the
Yeah, yeah. The
spoken part.
second, the
I
opening
got
is
the
you're not
no
singing, but
never
the second part you
mind,
are.
and I'm moving it up and down, but I'm not really singing. It clearly comes from the spoken, but it feels like I'm singing.
Yeah, it
And
does.
yeah, and my daughter says, "Oh, that's one of my favorite songs, Dad. I love the way you sing it."
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
it's mainly really spoken word in a way.
yeah. But it's like what actually what's interesting also, I mean, um, I wrote it down here. Um, so like when you did your best to deliver. Actually, do you know the words by heart?
Yeah, when you
No,
did
no,
your
so
best
because
to
you
deliver.
do it because why don't you just poetically read the words as you did the
When you
last time?
did your best to deliver a piece of your life, a lovelorn sliver, to someone poor enough to be a man, to someone rich enough to win your hand, didn't you think you were on the brink of living in your own refrain, of leaving the room like a washed out stain? Now you write me a letter trying to make you feel better. But your words will not suffice because you took away my nights with cold lights, hard nights, and highly individual uptights. I
Keep
got the
going.
no, never mind. I got the no, never mind. There you
Keep
go.
going. I
No,
want the
no,
second
no.
verse. No, 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 no. I
That's
want the second verse. I want the second verse.
geez, I don't know. I
Yeah, yeah.
like,
So okay, no, never mind. So there are veils in the dark, and
oh yeah,
and a
and a
fever in your
fever in your heart.
heart
Yeah,
because you
I,
lost your arch. You lost
no,
your
you
having
took this
gain to a man who
or
feels no
you took
pain.
this ordinary gain, and yeah.
Yeah, and
Anyway, it gets
yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway,
my
I,
favorite part of that little bit is there's a break where the band breaks, the
yeah,
whole thing breaks, and then I laugh.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But it's great that
that was
the
anyway.
aspect of why that works when and people you got to listen to the song because it's just so fantastic. Is that it's in a blues structure. So because it's in a blues structure, it's predictable. And so
Yeah,
you have a medium of predictability and where your words are not predictable on top of that, which creates this amazing groove. It creates this amazing groove. And then the secondary aspect, which I'd like to talk about, is that the mix. I don't know who mixed it, but the mix is uncanny. I mean, because very rarely do I hear a mix like that where you get your voice so upfront and present, and it sounds like the band is live, around you. It's not a kind of like a notion that it's on the grid. What I mean by on the grid is
yeah,
that music today on the grid is that one person records one part, it's totally on the grid, another person's recording the other part. And though it's supposed to sound um, in synchrony, it sort of doesn't. It doesn't feel like it has a natural groove as if all the people are in the same room. Like
yeah.
in the olden days, Led Zeppelin, Beatles, and whatnot, you see them playing in the studio because they all played at the same time. And the reason being is that the actual technology at that time didn't allow it not to be that way. But at the same time, because of it, there was a natural, synchronicity between all of them that allowed it to really sing. And I get that same
You
feeling.
know, you're just so bang on, and there's a song that I did on that very no, it wasn't the first album, it was the second album I did, second CD, Penthouse Electric Attic Blues.
Hmm.
And we were doing, off the floor for the drums and the bass guitar and the guitar and the piano just to get it off the floor, and then we were going to put me on top of it. But to get the whole vibe in the studio, we just did the thing, and we recorded the whole thing. When we finished it, it was like it was done in one take, and we
Yeah.
said we're not messing around with that
Yeah.
because it just had that absolute presence.
Yeah.
And I hear you, and it's so easy to lose it. But the other thing is, I think this is the electronic world and technicians taking over from the creative world. So bear me out. Try and watch a bloody football game or anything today without this crowd noise and the bands or the music or whatever they're doing as
Yeah.
the overlays. making it almost impossible to hear the announcers, right? You're
Right.
seeing that you have to get special sound systems now to separate that crap out so you can actually hear what they're
Yeah.
saying. That's what's happened with music. You know, the voice. It shouldn't be called the voice. It should be called the music. Try
Yeah.
and get your voice in, you know,
Yeah.
because the music, when they do their first auditions, you actually hear them because the band doesn't know what they're doing later. Now the band knows everything. And so you've got the engineers getting the band up again, and you can't hear the people anymore.
Yeah.
And to me, the human voice needs to be an instrument in the music.
Yeah.
And if you know, put everything else over top of the guitar when he's doing a solo, aren't you going to object? Well, shouldn't you object when you do that over the lyrics?
Yeah.
You know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
And for your music, and for music, your music as well. I mean, it's absolutely critical that we hear every single word, and that it adds that kind of presence. And then the other aspect of it, when I heard and they all sang together is
Yeah, sing along. Yeah.
that's right. They all sang along. They all sang along. Yeah. Was this that the mastering also was really, really good. Whoever did the mastering, it's super clear. It's super crystalline. It's very kind of engaging, and I'm really excited to know that. Yeah, when you did the No Never Mind, it was all done, all done in one take. But since and so let me just talk a little bit about the words of the song. So are the words of the song this idea of you're you're poetically angry. I don't care. This person is in the balance and they're found wanting. Is that? I mean, what inspired the words of that, or was it just a
So, you
creative
know,
writing?
so, there are moments in like breakups are as big as hookups, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you know, there's a song I wrote, which is one of my favorites. It's called Poetry. Um, and I wrote it to the love of my life. There's a song I wrote, it took me about 15 years before I could bloody well write it, that is the bookend of that song. And
yeah,
it's called Hard Time. And the chorus is, I had a hard time not spending time with you.
yeah,
Right. And so No Never Mind is what we do in a lot of ways with a breakup. What we're doing with that is, hey, you know what? I don't care. I
right.
don't mind. It doesn't bother me.
But it
Are
does.
you kidding me?
It
I'm
does.
dying.
Yeah,
Somebody put an arrow through my belly. You can see my breakfast.
yeah,
What are you talking about? This is horrible. No, I don't care. No,
yeah,
never mind.
yeah,
It's like, no, you don't matter. You were the problem, not
yeah,
me. Anyway, all that stuff you do in your own head to
yeah,
try and rationalize the pain.
yeah. There's one line that to someone poor enough to not be a man.
Oh, yeah. To someone poor enough to be a man, to someone rich enough to win your hand.
So what does it mean, poor enough to be a man? That was sort of like it was like a contradiction that sort of got me a little bit angry to hear it. But what did he, and but I said no, I'm just going to ask him what he meant by that line.
Okay, so here's a perspective. You don't have to share it. I think what happens when people get rich is they just put pillows and cushions around them
Got
to
it.
separate themselves from the world until they've got as much cushioning as possible to make everything as easy and nice as possible for them.
Got it.
And therefore, if you're a rich man, if you're really a rich man, I think it becomes more and more difficult
Yeah,
to actually be engaged
I believe it.
and meaningful.
No, I understand it.
On the other hand, to have a relationship, that's going to work for most women, most people, you
Yeah.
got to be rich enough to win the hand. You
Right,
know
right,
what I mean?
right. Yeah.
So it's that
It's a
poor enough to be
dichotomy.
a man, but rich enough to win your hand. There
Yeah,
you
yeah,
go.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And that you kind of, I mean, I'm a person of faith as well. Not as well, but just as a person of faith. I don't know where you are in that. That's no challenge there. But the idea that, it's easier for it's hard. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. It's the idea that you lose your capacity or context to be really, present and understand what's important. And so now I get
Yeah.
it. I'm taking now now that I hear you explain it, it's sort of like duh, it's the answer was the answer
Yeah.
poor enough to be a man, meaning that everything is stripped from you, and such to the point that you really are your true essence, and you're hiding within the comforts of whatever you have. You're
Yeah, so my gifting in a way in that was okay, so you're with somebody new, but I do get that he isn't valueless,
yeah,
like that
yeah,
he's poor enough to be a man, that he's actually touched. To me, one of the things in life is um it it, it it's so easy to kill a soul just by not paying attention, man.
yes,
And and it seems to me that wealth can cause you to stop paying attention to an awful lot of people.
yeah.
That's all.
Yeah, no, it's so good. And now that I've already covered the song last week, and they all sang along, but there are some words in there that I just would like to
Yeah.
to grab hold of, because when I read it, and everybody, please listen to the song. The arrangement is amazing. How David comes in and reads the words, and then the highlight moment, which I mentioned a little bit, is when the choir comes in, and it's so beautiful the way that the choir comes in, and it's almost like a mantra that makes you feel like everything's all right, And they all sang along, and then actually it's emotional. When I think about it now, it's emotional because it kind of tips in things within myself as well, and I'm sure it will tip in many of you that are listening to the song. That they all sang along. That regardless of what's going on, the memories of what you have, they all come along back to you in a kind of a comfort, and they all sing along with you, and it makes who you are. Um, because the opening line that you say, I left behind the memories, I left behind the dreams, frozen in my thoughts, like stitches in the seams. Man, dude, that image is so great, like stitches in the seams. Um, I didn't understand their tears as I drove out of sight. Now I'm thinking about them as oasis in the night. And the reason I love that image is that first of all, you're saying I left them behind. They're not important to me. I left them behind in my dreams, but yeah, wait a minute. And it's sort of like you zoom out and then you zoom back in again and say, but now I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about these memories. I'm thinking about these dreams, and they're an oasis. They're actually highly valuable to me. And then, I remember this saying in the night, and they all sang along. All these memories. If I'm getting it right, I might be thinking my own creative way
You're
about.
right.
Yeah, that these memories that I've left behind, and now they're oasis in the night, they're all singing along with me, and they make up my life. And it was the reason why it is cathartic for me to listen to the song, everybody, you really got to listen to it, is that you can go through some incredibly difficult times, and they're unpleasant. They're very, 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 very painful, and you leave them behind. But yet at the same time, those memories, those things that you have gone through, they come back to you not as enemies, but they come back to you as friends, as a means of actually defining exactly, yeah, you are this person, you went through these things, and they sing it as a celebration of you. Maybe it wasn't pleasant that you went through them, but that you did go through them, and they've defined who you are, and they're aligned to you now. Am I getting it right?
Yeah, you're really close here. I'm going to say that when Andy and I were talking earlier, I was saying there's a song I think he might like called "Moments of Joy."
Yeah,
That is on that album. And that is exactly to the thought you're talking about how, life has taken many things from us, but it still leaves us moments of joy.
yeah,
So that definitely addresses that very specifically because I went there and they all sang along. Where that went was because at the end, you hear it say, still here, but also gone.
yeah,
Still here, but also gone. So where that is I had this beautiful friend who was a motorcycle mechanic when I was in university. We were friends for 15, 18 years. I mean, we went on a motorcycle trip one time. He wanted to be like me in some ways. He wanted to write poetry. So he writes an epic poem about the trip. At the end, it says, and if he said, let's do it again, I'd say, let's go. Because it wasn't the sun we were looking to find. It was the looking. That's all. There's nothing more.
yeah,
And what I realized in my life and why they all sang along happened was I was thinking, as I move to different things in my life, you leave people behind. And it's not on purpose. And it's just what happens. If you're no longer in that sphere, I had a racing mechanic, same thing. It was just a great friend. When I think of people who I miss in my life, these two are really shining people in it. Amongst, other guy, there was a guy in the advertising business who was a very senior executive,
Yeah.
really cool guy. He stands there. There are different people, and you go, wow, they they really touch me. And you know, as I said back then, nothing left but good times.
Yeah.
Nothing left to say again. So
Yes.
it's all part of that too, because all I'm really wanting to do is to say, yeah, what parts in our life we're like singing in the same chorus with
Yes.
our friends and with our associates. And man, that's a beautiful time. And that's kind of what that one was really more about. It drifts back, but I got nothing left but good times,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
nothing left to say again.
Yeah, yeah, and they all sang along. I mean, it's sort of
They
like
all sang
these
along because they
memories. They all
did.
sang. I guess that's the context that nothing but good times. Or I had these memories. I left them behind. They become then an oasis in the desert, and they all
Yeah.
sang, and they all sang along. And so all these
Yeah.
kind of memories and whatnot that you look at from different perspectives, they all sing along with you, and they define what you are. I mean, I think it's just an absolutely brilliant song, and I just
And you're right on. I got a girl who's a gospel singer to do the backup vocals there, and it
yeah,
has that kind of haunting gospel feel, doesn't it?
yeah, no, it's absolutely great.
Yeah.
Listen, David, I just so much appreciate our time together.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for lending me your time to talk about your art, the influences on your life. Yeah, everybody, please check out David Deacon, his music. Oh, before we sign off, can you give me an idea
Yeah.
where you're heading now? Like what are your next plans
Um, I'm
musically?
I'm
Musically,
I'm I'm really right in on I'm not sure what's happening, what's going to go next.
yeah,
Um, you hit those periods when everything drops out and you're not sure this isn't working, that's not working, and a bunch of pieces in my life have dropped out at the moment.
yeah,
So what I did was I started writing, and I finished a book. It's called Free, and so I'm going to see if I can get that published, because that will help me, because I have some more books in my head that I
yeah,
want to do. And then you and I were chatting the other day,
yes,
and it caused me to start to go, oh, there might be a new route I could go in music that could be interesting. Um, my current, where I've been, is sort of stopped for the moment.
right,
And I guess in a way, it's funny. I had lunch today with an old friend of mine, a woman I've known for about 30 years, and we're just really great friends. And it's what you need to do in a way to keep exploring life is meeting new great friends. Do,
yes,
do you know?
yeah,
Because they do go their own way. I mean, it's great. I was talking about how few people in my life, that I've known for 30 or 40 years are still there in any way.
yeah,
But if you're still meeting new people and doing new things, it tends to spark something different. And I
yeah,
know you were talking the other day about Bob Dylan and saying, could you write what you wrote back then again? And he says, no. And why? Because it was all of the things that made up what that moment was.
yes,
And that was that was a whole renaissance in the world. Like if you look at the 20th century and say, who are the two most important artists in the 20th century? I will argue Bob Dylan and Picasso were those two artists.
yeah,
They completely changed their genres forever. Dylan made music and lyricism the poetry of our next centuries,
yes.
as opposed to the romantic poets of the 19th or something. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I don't know. I feel like that happens in a small way in our lives,
Yeah, yeah,
and so you don't know. You meet somebody, you encounter a situation, you go, I know what I'm going to try. I'm going to try doing it this way, and
yeah,
so something else comes of it. But
yeah,
I'm right in that. I'm going to find out, and 6 months from now, I'll tell you.
yeah. Great. And just as not as a spoiler alert, David and I have been and talking and just this the notion of eclectic roots groove and how that really has a resonance from the standpoint of even artists
Yes.
even in artists in the past. And maybe just kind of maybe if I can just ask to you, why does that have a resonance for you a little bit on the eclectic roots?
Okay, so there are a couple of things, but one of the most beautiful things I found my life opened up in because of, in the 60s, late 60s, I'd go to a folk festival, you'd have Joni Mitchell and Chris Christopherson, but you'd also have maybe Taj Mahal or Buddy Guy Blues, and then some rock band that was local, whatever. You'd have this whole mix of things. And somehow they didn't seem foreign to each other. They seemed a part of each other.
Yes.
And when I heard that line from you, the eclectic roots groove, I'm saying that has a lot to do. I mean, I never knew Emmylou Harris, and then somebody played Poncho and Lefty for me, and I'm sitting there going, wow, that just nailed me. And there's a problem with popular music and the way it's presented all the time that doesn't touch the root of us,
Yes.
which is, to me, roots music. And I just thought, oh, you've hit on something there where you can start to show where those similarities lie.
Yeah.
And your interview with Betty this last week was, or not interview, but discussion of her work was a good example of that. And I'm sure opened people's eyes. Oh man, there's some music there. And what I loved about the 60s and early 70s is how it resonated with its past and went and found some of those past heroes and made them great. Mississippi John Hurt became a star at age 75. Oh,
Yes.
wow, isn't that cool?
Yeah.
There was Stevie Ray Vaughan who heard Albert King, and it changed Stevie Ray's life.
Yeah.
And what Albert only really started getting heard when he was in his mid to late 40s. And I felt like your line, trying to get the right nomenclature for what something is
Yes.
really important. And I think this eclectic groove roots has real legs. I love it. So I don't know. And I get going on those sort of things. So, you always got to slow me down.
Yeah. But yeah, so so David and I will be talking further about that. It's just a real pleasure and an honor to meet you. I'm Canadian. It's fun to meet another Canadian. It's fun to hear the abouts and arounds in our accents. It's usually when I go home to Toronto for about a week, I'm like right back into the accent of what it is to be a true Torontonian. So thank you so much. Check David's music out on Spotify or any streaming service. He also has a website, deacon.com. It tells his story, and there's lots of other things that you can learn about him. It's just been a real pleasure. This is Eclectic Roots Groove playlist, week 36, curated by RCSQ Records, Rhythm and Chords, Stories and Questions. Take care, all the best, and thanks, David.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate your time.
Like a washed out stain. Now you write me a letter, trying to make you feel better. But your words will not suffice, 'cause you took away my nights with cold fights, hard lights, and highly individual uptights. I got the no never mind. So there are veils in the dark,